After the hurricane tore her world apart, Nora Langley thought she had lost everything: her peace, her purpose, her place in the world. But then came a wild bobcat, dragging a soaked burlap sack through the wreckage of a broken town. No one knew where he came from. No one expected what he carried. But what he delivered wasn't just food, it was hope. This is the unbelievable, true inspired story of a storm, a stranger, and a wild animal that changed an entire town's heart. Stay with us, because some stories start where you least expect them. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. If you enjoy the story, please like and follow. It helps us keep creating more. Your feedback means everything. Thank you. When Hurricane Felix finally moved on, it left Farage soaked and broken in silence. The rain had stopped, but puddles still shimmered in every dip of the street. Roof shingles lay scattered like lost feathers, tree limbs jutted across roads, and windows blinked at the sky with missing glass. The town looked like it had exhaled and then forgotten how to breathe. Nora Langley stood on the front steps of her rented cottage, clutching her cardigan closed with one hand and a lukewarm cup of tea with the other. 2 months ago, she had left behind the tangled pieces of a marriage in Houston and driven until the roads got quiet. Farage was supposed to be her blank page. Now it looked like someone had spilled ink all over it. No power, no signal, just the hum of stillness and her own heartbeat in her ears. She was about to step back inside when she saw it movement at the far end of Cypress Street. At first, she thought it was a dog, maybe a stray, but as it came closer, her breath caught. A bobcat, wild, unmistakable, lean, muscular, with a coat of golden-brown fur speckled with black. It walked not with the nervous quickness of a creature out of place, but with purpose, like it belonged here more than she did, and it was carrying something. Clutched between its jaws was a worn burlap sack, darkened from moisture, and heavy enough that the animal had to tug it along the pavement with effort. The bag bumped and scraped, but the bobcat never let go. Every few feet, it stopped, readjusted, and kept going. Nora froze. Her first instinct was to retreat, but something held her in place, curiosity or loneliness, or both. Slowly, cautiously, she followed, keeping a wide distance, but never letting it out of her sight. They moved past 3 blocks of battered homes. Only a few people were visible, most had evacuated or stayed inside. One elderly man on a porch saw the cat and waved. Echo made it through. "Huh," he called. Then he spotted Nora trailing behind. "You're new." She nodded, but didn't stop. The bobcat turned up a gravel driveway, weaving between a fallen oak branch and a dented trash bin. The house was old brick with a sagging porch. A blue tarp flapped weakly over part of the roof. The bobcat stopped at the side door, dropped the sack on the concrete stoop, and let out a high-pitched chirp, more bird than cat. Then it sat. Nora hovered at the edge of the yard, unsure what she was witnessing. The side door creaked open. A tall, weathered man with white hair and deep-lined eyes stepped into the frame. His voice cracked, but was soft. "Well, I'll be. You came back. And you brought supplies." He bent down, slowly lifting the sack with a grunt. When he looked up, he noticed Nora. "Looks like you brought company too," he said, not unkindly. I'm sorry," Nora stammered. "I didn't mean to intrude. I saw him. I followed. I thought maybe he needed help." The man gave a slow chuckle. "Echo doesn't need help. But I might. You look like you could use some coffee. Instant's all I got. No power." Nora hesitated. The storm had hollowed her out, and the silence in her cottage was beginning to echo louder than any wind. She stepped forward. "I'm Nora," she said. "Walter," he replied, pushing the door wider. "Walter McCann. Come on in. I'll tell you how that wild rascal saved my hide again." As Nora stepped inside, Echo padded past her, brushing her leg just slightly. She didn't flinch. Instead, she felt something warm settle in her chest. She hadn't expected anything good to come after the storm. But this felt like a beginning. The next morning brought a strange quiet to Farage. The kind that settled after something violent had passed, leaving only broken pieces and the first signs of rebuilding. The air smelled of damp wood diesel and salt. Nora returned to Walter McCann's porch, unsure whether it was politeness or something deeper that had drawn her back. She knocked gently on the open screen door. From inside, a gruff but friendly voice called, "Come on in. Echo's already claimed your seat." Sure enough, the Bobcat was curled up near the arm of the couch, his spotted body relaxed but alert. His amber eyes flicked toward her with mild interest, then closed again as if to say, "You're expected." Walter stood at the kitchen counter, pouring bottled water into a dented pot on a gas camping stove. Still no power, but the coffee's hot enough to fool the brain. Nora stepped in, brushing stray leaves from her sleeves. "I brought a flashlight and some canned soup. You might need them." He gave a grateful nod. "Max'll be happy to know someone besides me has taste in food. That boy won't touch instant noodles unless there's a hurricane involved." "Max?" she asked, settling into a wooden chair as he passed her a chipped mug. "My grandson, 7 years old, strong as a pine root. His folks evacuated to Austin. He and Echo, well, there's something special." As the water hissed on the stove, Walter sat across from her, elbows on the table. He took a long breath before he spoke again. "I found Echo after a storm about 7 years ago. He was just a soaked little scrap under a piece of fence wire, barely breathing. I should have called animal control, I know that now. But I had just lost my wife, and the silence in this house was eating me alive." He sipped his coffee. "So I kept him, bottle-fed him, told myself it was temporary, built an enclosure out back. But that cat had other ideas." Nora listened without interrupting, her fingers wrapped tightly around the warm mug. He started breaking out of the enclosure, finding his way inside. Nothing dangerous, just there, by the door, watching. He'd follow me when I did yard work. And when Max started walking, Echo shadowed him like a big brother. Nora smiled faintly. "So he's wild, but not quite." "That's right. He hunts, disappears for days, but he always comes back, especially for Max." He leaned forward. "That's why I didn't evacuate. I couldn't leave Echo. I figured if he ran during the storm, at least I'd be here if he came back." Nora's gaze drifted to the Bobcat, now stretching his front legs in a luxurious arc before settling again. "I thought he was gone," Walter said quietly, "when the roof tore open and he bolted out the window. I thought that was it. But he came back," she said softly. "And not empty-pawed either. That sack he brought, it was from my shed. I'd forgotten I even stored food there. Jerky kibble, a few cans. Somehow he found it. And dragged it here." He gave a hoarse laugh. "You ever hear of a bobcat making a supply run?" Nora shook her head. "Never. Neither have I. But Echo's never really followed rules." Outside, a truck rumbled faintly down a distant road. Birds had begun to return to the trees. The town, it seemed, was learning how to breathe again. Walter stood and stretched his back, cracking. Still plenty of cleanup to do. "You're welcome to stay or come back later. I wouldn't mind the company. Echo doesn't say much." "I'll come back," she said. He gave a small nod. Then it settled. As Nora stepped back onto the porch, Echo padded silently behind her. He paused at the doorway, then brushed against her calf just once, before disappearing into the overgrown yard. In that fleeting touch, she felt something both ancient and personal, as if the wild had recognized her and accepted her, And for the first time in weeks, she smiled without sadness. 3 days after the storm, the roads finally began to clear. Volunteers arrived with chainsaws and shovels, and the hum of recovery replaced the hush of wreckage. Still, the power hadn't returned, and Walter's porch remained lit only by the soft golden glow of battery lanterns. Nora was there again, handing up supplies, as Walter re-tarped the roof with slow, practiced movements. Echo watched from the grass, like a supervisor tail flicking occasionally in silent approval. Then, mid-morning, a familiar engine rumbled down the street. Walter paused mid-hammer. That's them. A mud-splattered pickup truck turned into the driveway. Before it came to a full stop, the passenger door flew open and a young voice rang out. Grandpa Echo. A boy with tousled brown hair leapt from the truck, his rain boots splashing in leftover puddles. Echo stood instantly, ears forward, body alert, but not alarmed. The Bobcat bounded across the yard and met the boy halfway, circling him in tight loops, chirping softly. "You're okay, I told Mom and Dad you'd be okay," Max shouted, dropping to his knees and hugging the Bobcat's neck. Walter climbed down from the ladder slower than he used to. Nora stepped back to give them space. Tom and Melissa, Max's parents, got out of the truck more carefully. Melissa had the tired eyes of a nurse who'd been on duty too long. Tom looked like a man who'd carried worry on his back for days. They reached Walter, and the hug between father and son was long and wordless. Then Melissa joined arms around both of them. Dad, Tom finally said, "We tried calling, but the towers were down until yesterday. When we didn't hear from you, I stayed for Echo," Walter said simply. Melissa wiped her eyes. "Of course you did." Nora remained by the porch steps, unsure if she should stay. But Max noticed her. "Are you Echo's friend too?" he asked, still kneeling beside the Bobcat. "I guess I am." She smiled. She followed Echo the day he brought Grandpa the food. Walter said, gesturing toward Nora. He brought supplies from the shed out back, dragged the bag all the way through town. Melissa looked stunned. "He did what?" Tom chuckled, ruffling Max's hair. "Looks like your theory was right, buddy." Echo took care of Grandpa. Max beamed. Later, as the family settled inside to rest, Nora lingered on the porch with Walter. Echo stretched out at their feet, tail twitching occasionally, but otherwise content. "You weren't kidding," Nora said, sipping coffee. "That bond between Echo and Max. It's real. It's deep," Walter replied. When Max was little, just starting to toddle, Echo was already there. Not tamed, not trained, just present, like he'd chosen the boy. He glanced down at the Bobcat. "Some say animals don't feel love. I think they just show it differently. Echo's never needed a leash to stay near Max, and when the storm hit, I think he knew. Not just that I'd need food, but that I'd need someone." Nora didn't answer at first. She was watching Max through the window, showing Echo a drawing he'd made. The Bobcat sat patiently as the boy talked occasionally, lifting a paw as if pointing at something on the paper. "I've never belonged anywhere," Nora said quietly. "Not in Houston, not after the divorce. I came here to be alone, and now I find myself drinking instant coffee with a man and his Bobcat." Walter smiled. "Funny how storms blow more than trees down. Sometimes they clear space for something better." A silence settled, comfortable and warm. Then Max burst out the front door, a paper clutched in his hand. "Miss Nora, Echo and I drew this for you." She took it with care, a crayon drawing of a Bobcat, standing beside a smiling woman with long hair. A big sun beamed down from the corner, and under it in a child's handwriting were the words, "You followed the wild. Now you're part of it." Nora blinked back tears. Echo nudged her leg with his head and let out a quiet chirp. Something inside her shifted. Not violently, not all at once, but like sunlight slowly drying out a long flooded room. She was still healing, still rebuilding. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't doing it alone. By the fourth day, Farage no longer looked like a disaster zone. It looked like a town trying to remember itself. Chain-link fences were back upright. Shingles had been reattached or swept away. The church's steeple, once knocked sideways by the storm, now stood proud if a little crooked. And the people, well, they were different too. Softer, quieter, more willing to meet each other's eyes. That evening, Nora found herself walking toward the school field at the edge of town, invited by Melissa and Tom to attend the post-storm community cookout, a local tradition, they said, whenever disaster knocked on Farage's door. It was a way of saying, "We're still here." She hesitated just before entering the field. Music was playing from a speaker. Children laughed and chased each other across damp grass. Long folding tables were covered with food-grilled hot dogs, foil-wrapped corn pots of coleslaw, and whatever groceries hadn't spoiled during the outage. She felt out of place for just a second. Then Max's voice rang out across the crowd. "Miss Nora." Over here echo came too. A ripple of laughter spread around them. Nora followed his voice to find Walter and his family seated on a worn blanket near the edge of the field. And right beside them, resting with quiet alertness, was Echo. The Bobcat sat close to Max, his ears twitching as children played nearby, but he made no move to run or growl. Just watched. As Nora approached, Tom stood and offered her a folding chair. "You're officially part of the crew now," he said with a grin. "Echo says so." She laughed. "Good to know I've been vetted by the wild." Max held up a paper plate. "We saved you a hot dog." She took it heart full. It wasn't long before others approached her too. Neighbors she had only seen from a distance before the storm. A woman with a gray braid introduced herself as Margaret from the library. Coach Wilson from the high school offered her lemonade. Even Edith Dennings, known for her sharp tongue and the infamous "Beware of Bobcat" sign, gave her a wink. "You followed that cat through a flooded town?" Edith asked, clearly impressed. "That's either bravery or the best story we'll hear all year." "Maybe both," Nora replied. As the sun dipped low, someone brought out a guitar, and familiar chords began to drift over the field country tunes, folk songs and hymns sung by voices tired but steady. Nora found herself humming along her foot, tapping gently against the grass. And through it all, Echo remained. A few of the relief workers, new faces from Dallas, Austin, even Canada, watched the Bobcat with open curiosity. "That really a wild animal?" one asked in disbelief. Nora smiled. "He's wild, but he's more than that." She told them the story of Echo disappearing during the hurricane, of the bag he brought back, of the people he touched. She left out nothing and added nothing. The truth, after all, was already remarkable. "You really think he knew what he was doing?" one volunteer asked. Nora paused, watching as Max rested his head against Echo's side, the boy already half asleep. The Bobcat didn't flinch. "I think some instincts are stronger than fear," she said. "I think he knew someone needed him." Silence followed. The good kind. Later that night, as stars emerged above the field and the fireflies blinked between blades of grass, Walter leaned toward her. "You came to this town looking for peace," he said quietly. She nodded. "I thought I wanted to be alone." And now she looked around the field, the faces, the boy and the Bobcat curled together like threads in the same fabric. "Now," she said, "I don't want to miss anything." Echo lifted his head, then just for a second, and looked straight at her. Then he lay it back down beside Max, as if to say, "Good. You understand now." 1 week after the storm, the power came back to Farage. It returned without fanfare, just the quiet hum of refrigerators, the blink of porch lights, and the sudden rush of water heaters roaring to life. But it meant something. It meant the worst was behind them. It meant the town had survived. Nora stood in her kitchen blinking at the light bulb overhead like it was a miracle. She should have felt thrilled. Instead, she felt restless. The next morning, she walked to Walter's house without needing to say why. She found him on the porch radio buzzing beside him. Echo sprawled at his feet like a king in exile. Max was at school. Farridge Elementary had reopened that morning, with only half its roof, but a full heart. Walter looked up from his thermos. "You ever think a storm can fix something?" Nora sat beside him. "You mean like a blessing in disguise?" He nodded. "Funny thing. The hurricane knocked down part of my roof, but somehow brought you here. Gave Echo a reason to remind us all what loyalty looks like." Nora smiled, "and gave me a reason to stop running." They sat for a while sipping coffee and listening to the low rustle of a town breathing again. Suddenly, Echo stood. No sound had startled him, no movement, but something in the air had shifted. His body was alert, but calm, his eyes fixed on something distant. And then, without fanfare or farewell, he turned and walked down the porch steps across the yard and into the trees beyond. Nora stood. Echo Walter didn't move. Let him go. But where's he going? Where he always goes, when he knows it's time. A knot tightened in her chest. Will he come back? Walter looked at her gently. Echo's not ours to keep. He never was. But he comes when someone needs him. That's how he's always lived. She watched as the spotted form slipped between tree trunks and vanished like a thought you can't hold on to. That evening, Max came home from school and didn't ask where Echo was. He only placed a small stuffed animal battered but loved on the porch step beside Echo's favorite spot. "He'll know we're thinking of him," Max said quietly. 2 days passed, then 3. The town moved on, fixing windows, repainting shutters, planting fresh flowers in front yards. Life returned slowly but steadily. But every now and then, someone would mention Echo. The cashier at the grocery store said she saw him on the edge of the woods at dawn. A jogger swore Echo trotted beside her silently for a block before disappearing again. A little girl claimed he brought her a pine cone and sat by her swing until she stopped crying. Each story was different, but all of them ended the same way. And then he was gone. One morning, Nora woke to find a single paw print on her back step. Fresh, clean, as if pressed deliberately. She sat on the porch with her tea and smiled at nothing in particular. Echo had been here. That was enough. Years later, people still told the story of the bobcat that brought supplies through a flooded town, of the woman who followed him, of the boy he watched over like a brother, of the man he refused to abandon. Some versions grew taller with each retelling. In one, Echo dragged a whole crate of food. In another, he knocked on the door like a person. But those who knew him best, Nora, Walter, Max, never needed embellishment. Because they'd felt it. Because they'd been chosen. And sometimes when Nora walked the trail behind her home, she still swore she heard something in the brush, soft footsteps, amber eyes watching the wild, pausing to remind her, "You are not alone."